Hey there, and welcome back to my new player guide series, specifically focusing on the DLC. As always, these are 20 to 30 minute crash course guides targeted at new players trying out the DLC for the first time, looking for tips. And I modified that to be 30 minutes potentially because the last two have gone a little longer than I intended. That said, we won't waste time, but basically the goal here is to focus on important general topics in less detail rather than the hyper-comprehensive guides spanning multiple hours. What we're going to be doing here is rounding out our clan coverage here with a guide on Wurmkin. So nothing too crazy there. As a reminder, do leave a comment with any ideas for other guides you'd like me to make. You can like the video or dislike it, and subscribe if you want to see more. So rock on. Now, the savvy among you will know that I already made a really big guide video on this already. It'll be in the video description, I will link to it, so don't worry. It's also in the exact same playlist on my channel as this video, so you can just find it if you want. Now, you may ask, why the heck am I doing this as well? Basically, I decided to make this guide just because I wanted to complete the clan series directed at new players, and the bigger clan overview is a lot of detail, a ton of detail, and I don't think that's a very digestible format for most players, especially new players who are going to be really overwhelmed by my demos and everything in that one. That said, if you're a little more advanced or you have already seen this video, then maybe go check that one out afterwards, right, at the end of this one, and you can learn a lot more. Some of the things will be the same between the two, because I expect that there will be people who watch this one and not the other one. Ultimately, these have been doing pretty well, and I think that they're a useful tool for players, specifically people just grabbing the DLC or the first class launch on the Switch, and yeah, I think it's good. So that's why we're doing this. Now, we've already talked on the worst clan, the best clan. I've hit on some of the others. Wurmkin is what I consider to be part of the four middle of the road clans. They're very good. They're good. Right? There's nothing crazy. It's very hard to rate which one is better than which, and I think it's very down to the subjectivity of the matter. People are going to have opinions about which they're stronger with, which they prefer to play. Could be play style. Could be a lot of different things. Just personal consistency, and I don't think there's any really objective way to measure which one is stronger than the others. So it's in the middle of the pack, somewhere in there. And basically, there's a lot of things about Wurmkin that I think you should know, right? First of all, the units are overcosted somehow. There's always some way that a unit is overcosted compared to what other clans. This could be more Ember, this could be more size, right? And in some cases, it may be a requirement that you have more of them in order to achieve comparable results. But as a result of that, they pay out a little better, and they start with higher base stats, and they get really ridiculous when you kind of group them up. Additionally, to kind of combat that, though, the spells themselves are way undercosted, and they have ridiculously overpowered effects for what they cost. You'll see something, and I will point it out in a little bit, but I will compare a Wurmkin common to an Awoken rare card, and the difference is quite astounding in how they are costed for basically identical effects. So it's a little interesting. And the real kind of question at the end of the day is, does that balance out? Kind of. You decide, right? The clan feels strong. You should be able to win pretty well with it, honestly. But it's somehow disjointed as a result, and I'll ultimately explain why. There's a few things that we'll cover, and it's kind of weird, but it works. And I think the clan definitely does get carried pretty hard by a small group of ridiculously powerful cards. So, now, to kind of go off of what I've been doing in the other clans is I've been covering their new card in the DLC, right? It could be a spell in the case of melting, or units in the case of the other clans. Well, okay, the Wurmkin clan is entirely new in the DLC, so I could cover everything, but you know what, that's redundant. Instead, what I'm going to hit on here is their new mechanic, Charged Echoes. So, basically, most of the things in this clan interact with charged echoes in some form or another. It's essentially a floor-based resource added to a floor by infused cards and some card effects. So you can see one here, fill empty slots with filled slots, right? And you can see the tooltip for charged echoes here as well, in case you want to read that. Essentially, infused cards will add it to a floor, and then they use these echoes as a resource, either by spending them or by consuming them with units, or by powering up abilities by scaling them against the number of echoes on your floor. So there are also abilities that trigger when they get added, and so on and so forth. And there are abilities and status effects that multiply as a result. So everything basically revolves around echoes in some form or another. Cards become infused in a few ways, but the most important thing is there is a relic form. So I'm going to hop over here and show you. Oh, right, it's not in the stupid logbook, of course. It's very strange that it's not there. Anyway, Wurmkin have a starting relic, okay? They have a starting relic that gives them their power of infusion. Essentially, what it does is it makes their starter cards infused. So anytime you play Wurmkin, you automatically get this relic, and it makes all of your starters infused. Now, specifically the clan-based starters that you always have. These are your torches, your restores, your foregone powers, and additionally the Wurmkin versions, the fractures, and the echo breaks. So it's not going to upgrade your train stewards, and it also doesn't upgrade the cards that you get from Covenant 1. So when it drops cards in your deck, that might be like a Rage Imp or something like that. Those do not get the infusion. They come uninfused. So this also means that you will get additional echoes whenever you... Well, not additional echoes, but you will see one card in every clan pack that is infused. And so when you see cards, you will see some of them have random infusions. And there are relics that interact with this as well. We'll cover those in a bit. But suffice it to say, it basically adds infused to random cards, more or less. And you then use them as resources, right? Some other relics as well are going to interact with these mechanics, all like echoes in particular. We have a whole section on that, no worries. I also want to hit on part of their new mechanic here. I mentioned status effects earlier. There is a Reap status effect. I'm just going to hover over Fracture here for you. Essentially, it says that a unit takes 1 damage per stack per echo after combat ends. So you have 2 stacks, you have 2 echoes, that's 4 damage, right? It's 2 damage per echo. So you get 4 damage there. And it's when combat ends on a floor. So this is not every relentless round like Frostbite. This is once when combat ends on the floor. That's very different. So it's really strong. Reap is excellent, but that's how it behaves. We'll talk again. I have this as something we'll cover in a bit as a very strong kind of mechanic overall. But this is what it is. And so, as you might imagine, the push-pull of gaining and spending these echoes and ultimately triggering other abilities, it creates a bit of a dichotomy in the clan. So most of its lines are at odds with one another. You've got everything that's dependent on these echoes, and then you've got everything that's doing the other thing that Wurmkin does, which we'll hit on. And they don't really play nicely with one another. There's not a lot of interaction between the two. There are maybe 2 cards that actually bridge the gap a little bit. Probably needs a little more in the clan overall, but both lines are strong, and it'll work out in the end. Additionally, when you're choosing between these lines, when you're Wurmkin primary, your champion determines your line very heavily. Each one of the champions, the default and the exile, leans one way or the other pretty strongly. So I don't want to spend too much time dawdling on this, though, because we will hit on those lines shortly. So we'll just kind of jump right into it. Now I'm going to hit on the Inspire line. So I've been talking about things that interact with echoes. Inspire. There's also a champion path here that does it, which is probably one of the more important ones. But essentially, Inspire is similar to Incant from Stygian, which you maybe know about if you've played that or seen my guide on it. Now, it essentially triggers when an echo is applied to a floor once per echo added. This means that if you add 4 echoes to a floor at once with something like Soul Siphon, which I hovered over before, it will apply 4 triggers of Inspire. Additionally, because of the way Infused works, you can have infused units. Things like Imps can be infused, and so playing an Imp will trigger Inspire. Now, this is important because I think notionally, once you build your deck a certain way and optimize your run, I think Inspire is a more powerful, more commonly activated trigger than Incant. I think Inspire is actually just better overall. And it's because of the way you kind of cultivate your deck down to be purple, more or less, is the kind of the notional description of it, because it's a purple border on the card, and you just play purple cards. You play infused cards, and they will trigger a lot of Inspire. Now, it's pretty cool, more or less. I think it's a really strong line. The lines are very powerful. They strongly encourage you to find ways to overstack floors, especially because look how big these dudes are, right? The champion that will cover Spine Chief, as it were, he's big too. They're all huge. You really want to overload your floor with as many of them. You can even see this on Keeper of Echoes here. It applies its ability to the whole floor. Really important. So you want to find ways of doing this. This is one of the few reasons why something like Sketches of Salvation is probably a better pick when you are primary Wurmkin and have access to a number of their units. Being able to put, say, 4 Keeper of Echoes on a floor is really strong. Similarly, it can be Shard Soul Carver or whatever here, because you want to be playing all your Echoes on one floor for the value. If you have to split it up, it's not going to be nearly as good. I will briefly cover the units here, at least. I mentioned Keeper of Echoes. This is one of those units that is really bad alone, but when you multiply it by having more units and more copies of itself on the floor, it gets ridiculously strong. Think about the math here. You have one of these on the floor. It's alone, +1/+1 per Inspire. That's bad. That is a bad rate. You have 2 on the floor. Each one gives +1/+1 to both of them. So essentially, they gain +2/+2 from it. Cool, so you're getting 4 stats now instead of the previous number, right? Or rather, you're getting 4 triggers, right? Because each one of the keepers gives you 2 triggers. So it's 1 trigger versus 4 triggers. And then you imagine again, if I have 3 of them on the floor with the 3 keepers specifically, that's 9. You can see the kind of exponential growth here. They become significantly more powerful. You're powering up far more units. You're applying way more stats, right? Which is an important metric. How many stats are you getting per activation? And this number can go through the roof if you can overload a floor. This unit is extremely good, but it forces you down a path that enables you to play more of them. You're going to be taking a lot of space, and you want to play at least 2, at a minimum 2, in order to feel good. 3 and you're feeling excellent, and if you can somehow pull 4 or more off, your floor is pretty much unkillable as long as you're playing anything infused. Really good. Shard Soul Carver is an interesting one, because you look at this thing and you compare it to a Siren of the Sea, and you might notionally think, okay, +2/+2, essentially. It's big, and it has big stats, but the bigness of it, that's not really a word, you know what I mean. The size of the thing makes it hard to play multiples. Additionally, its infusion adds +1 space, which is kind of awkward, right? I mean, it's hard to add this in other units because you're going to run into problems with that. I think it's warranted, though. This card is better than it looks, and it's because, in large part, Inspire is better than Incant, more or less. Incant can be messed with. There's only so many times. You can only play so many cards in a turn. And additionally, while there is the Founding Seal relic in the case of Incants to double your triggers, almost all of the Wurmkin relics will give you additional triggers of this by adding echoes to a floor when you satisfy some condition. And it can be ridiculously strong. Surprisingly so. The other important thing is to note that you get the full ability of Shard Soul Carver on its infusion, not just a half-seas version of it like you would with the Siren of the Sea. This makes it very powerful. If you can fit this onto a smaller unit like an egg, which we'll talk about later, this can become really potent. So don't sleep on Shard Soul Carver's essence. I actually think it's really good. And the unit itself is pretty solid as well. And then there's Glugsider. This guy, he's cool, but I think he's actually really bad. He introduces the extract mechanic, which I haven't talked about, but we'll touch on a bit in another section. And as a unit with extract and draw priority, it's kind of awkward, right? You're not going to have enough echoes on the floor to play him usually. If you can somehow satisfy that condition, and you play him, he removes the echoes, which he then needs in order to apply Reap and actually do damage with it. And this unit is awkward. It's very awkward. It's trying to be Titan Sentry, and it ends up being worse than it. The one kind of redemption of this unit is its essence. While huge, it basically just gives its whole ability the revenge effect without costing you echoes. It removes the extract. And usually if you can put this in something that you're happy to replay a bunch of times, it can actually be pretty good. I have put this in Titan Sentry himself. I have put this in an Endless Welder Helper and just used that. Granted, you lose draw priority on it, but it still works. There are answers. I've also even put this into Tomes. You just give it plus 25 and Endless. Its infusion adds another plus 20, and you have something with like 50 HP that is happy to just blast a little bit. And that kind of works. It's strange, but it works. So I don't love this unit. Won't say anything good about it, but I'm not going too far down that rabbit hole here. Suffice it to say, I think Inspire is good, and we'll talk about the champion later. Now, the next one I want to hit on is Etch. I was talking a little bit ago about the two parts of the clan being a little bit at odds with one another. And this is because half of the clan wants to interact with echoes very strongly. The other half doesn't care about echoes at all and instead just wants you to consume a ton of spells on a floor. And the other champion, the Exile champion, Echowright, interacts strongly with Etch. There aren't a lot of units that have Etch triggers in the game as far as banner units. Glareminder has one, for instance. It's a rare unit. It's a sweeper. But the problem is because it says sweep, its Etch ability was balanced to virtual pointlessness. You're not going to win runs off of the Etch ability on Glareminder, so the fact that it has it is basically pointless. Bog Wurmling also comes from an egg. This unit looks busted if you just look at its stat line, but you never get to play it directly. You have to hatch an egg. The whole thing is a mechanic that is worth talking about, but we're not going to get into it here. If you do get this unit out, Etch is excellent on it. It gives it a ton of stats, plus 10 attack and plus 10 health, but just getting this thing out is pretty tricky usually. And then you have the actual good Etch unit, First of Kin, which just says plus 5 attack on Etch. It's good scaling, and if you imagine Incant, now just imagine cultivating your deck down so it's essentially only consume spells, and imagine you getting plus 5 attack for an Incant instead of plus 1. It's very different. This even outscales something like Nameless Siren's Rage values. You get 2 Rage on an Incant. That's only 4 attack, and it wears off, whereas this is 5 permanent attack. Very good. It's also a beefy unit that just kind of dumps all over something like Demon Fiend, right? 30 attack, 55 health for 3 space with 3 Ember. It's playable. It has a scaling ability. Its infusion is just its ability, which is excellent. So, Demon Fiend eat your heart out, basically. It's a tough world to live in where First of Kin exists and you happen to be a big demonic lad. So, fair enough. Etch is very strong, though. It has a ton of supporting cards in the clan. You can even see one here. Wurmkin Etchings. Consume, return 5 consume spells to the top of your draw pile. This is essentially their tome in the clan. If you think about like One Horn's Tome, for instance, as a comparison point. But you just imagine cards like this, Broken Memories, or let's see if I can pull some up. I'll look at the consumed spells. I think this will pull up a good number of them. Yeah, here's Broken Memories. You've got a lot of really strong consumed spells here that are very good at either bringing back other consume spells or making spells consume, like Return Soul, right? And if they're just power consume cards on their own, you're happy to play them on Etch lines, right? There are a couple cards like Total Recall and Ambient Charge which add consume to random spells that you draw. They can be good sometimes, but they more often than not betray you. And additionally, you even have interactions with the number of consumed cards in your deck or rather how many you've played in things like Power of Knowledge. Deal 15 damage for each spell in the consume pile. Can be pretty good. So there's lots of interaction here in very powerful ways to trigger those consume effects. I do want to talk, I mentioned Return Soul. This card is busted in an obscene way. You just read the card text. It's a 0 cost spell that returns a spell card from the discard pile to your hand, so you get it back to play it immediately. It makes it infused, which gives it an echo. It makes it cost -1 Ember, so it's cheaper, and it consumes. So you essentially burn cards as needed. Imagine this being frozen. This is essentially any card you've seen up to this point, and you play it and you burn it. This is both Etch value, this is Inspire value, this is deck thinning value, so you could do an infinite potentially with this in your deck because it removes down your cards. This card is also free. I think I would personally pay 1 ember for this, no questions asked. It could even remove some of the effects, and I would love it. And there's just a lot of things about this card that make it absolutely crazy. It's easy to look at this, be either confused by it or not sure why it's good. And yeah, so that's Etch, and that's what's so good about it. I now want to talk about eggs. I've briefly mentioned them a couple times. We've run into them. Essentially, they have a mechanic called shell, which drains echoes from a floor equal to the number of remaining shell on the card. And when you get the shell down to 0, it hatches. It basically spawns some stuff. So the bog chrysalis spawns 2 bog flies. You can see the spawned unit in the tooltip there. The Kinhost Vessel spawns a Kinhost Pupa, and then this Bog Deep Cocoon, the rare unit, pops out. The Bog Wormling we were just looking at with Etch value. So eggs are very strong, and it's easy. They're deceptively strong. They look weaker than they are, and so they're very complex. It's very common for people to look at this, not see the strength, and basically give up. All of them are really good in their own way. The challenge is creating enough echoes on a floor fast enough to hatch them so that you get the value out of them. And they're also very flimsy, 1 HP, so you have the ability to interact with them via something like Hardened Hull, one of their relics, which I can pull up briefly. Right over, if I can find it, right here, Hardened Hull. When an egg unit is summoned, remove shell 3 and apply armor 30. Very powerful interaction there. So you can interact with that to give it HP. You can just give it some stats. All upgrades on these units are passed down to the hatched units, including infusions from the DLC, which, as you can imagine, is very strong. Kinhost Pupa pops out with multi-strike, pretty good. Bog Chrysalis spawns 2 units, so you get 2 copies of your infusion, really good. And then Bog Deep Cocoon pops out the Wormling that has big etch value, great stats, and trample. So you can imagine how these units are pretty good in their right contexts. And it can be really good in general. I don't sleep on these units, but do be mindful of how fast you can hatch them. Bog Deep Cocoon requires shell 12, that's 12 echoes. If you take this unit early in the game, it can betray and kill you because you have a hard time actually generating 12 echoes to hatch this thing before the boss demolishes you or units kill your egg. So just be really careful when you take these that you feel confident enough you're able to get them popped out. You can also see here Accelerated Incubation. It's a consume spell that just removes shell 3 from eggs on the floor. Really good if you have eggs, right? You take this card, it speeds you up a lot. Maybe you give it an intrinsic, you kind of go to town. These are probably my favorite units in the clan overall. They're really strong. Notice how the smaller ones are 1 space, so you can do things like toss a Shard Soul Carver infusion in. Really good in general. All right, and then I want to move on to extract cards. These are the cards that I talk about when I say they're undercosted and very overpowered. These cards are absolutely ridiculous. They require a certain number of echoes on a floor in order to be played, and they consume that many echoes when played. So for instance, Echo Transfer, extract 2, takes 2 echoes to play it, and then removes 2 echoes. Cool. Worth noting that when you draft these in your clan packs, they can be infused, and those infusions reduce the extract cost by 1. Very cool, right? Basically making them cheaper. And they're notoriously undercosted and overpowered. They're a big part of what I referred to earlier, basically, as one of Wurmkin's strengths. If there's ever a new balance patch for this game, I basically imagine that there's no way these all survive in their current form. They're just too strong. They generally offer either huge status effects or huge stats for 0 cost, which is absurd. Look at Echo Infusion. 0 cost, extract 1 Echo, apply 10 health. Now I'm going to go over here and we're going to pull up Cycle of Life. 3 Ember for 10 health. That same effect for 3 Ember. And then Spikes 3 as well, but this is so low value that who really cares? The comparison there is absurd. Okay? Echo Infusion is so much of a better card that it's basically crazy to me that those 2 cards exist in the same game state. Right? Then you have Echo Transfer, the attack version, plus 15 attack, Razor Sharp Edge, eat your heart out. You've got Proclamation, a 0 cost big spell. It does 50 damage baseline and is attuned. You give this thing a plus 10 in piercing, it goes crazy. Soul Crushing Guilt, 0 cost, 3 days and move it to the back. You've got Revenge of the Damned, which is 1 cost, takes 1 echo, and then it's basically Hornbreak here. And then if you slay, you get echoes back. Ridiculous. And then Force Contamination. Melee Weakness 3. Imagine for 0 Ember. Imagine throwing this in front on a boss or something with Trample or whatever, and you can just get crazy numbers out of this. It does so much power. It quadruples the attack value of your unit for one hit. So absolutely ridiculous. These cards are excellent. And then even the big ones, Symphony of a Soul and Perfect Insanity, are weird and very expensive, but have very powerful effects, potentially, if you can just play them randomly. So if you have the right deck for them. It's interesting. I actually think these two rare extract cards, ironically, are the least powerful. They can still be good. This is Perfect Insanity and Symphony of a Soul, but they're extraordinarily situational, and they're among my most skipped cards in the clan, sadly. There's very few situations where these are the right choices, right? One thing you'll notice, though, is that the low extract costs are easy to pay, but high extract costs of 4 and more are crazy hard to play with consistency. It's also, we talked about Glugsider a little bit, it's one of the biggest weaknesses of this unit, is the need to extract 4 and the competition of that extract value against the reap that it applies. So, fair enough. All of these cards are excellent, though, in some form or another. Ambient Charge is also here. You can do some infinites with it. I don't like this card, but it's fine. I actually think there are some good strategies that utilize it, so fair enough, fine. It draws you cards for echoes, essentially. All right, I do want to talk about the other units here, the banner units in particular. I think we've hit on all of them except for Kinho's Carapace. He's here. He says, when played, gain plus 10 attack, health, and plus 1 size per echo on the floor. It costs 2. He's a 10-10 baseline. This unit's really bad. Very hard to play this unit in any form and make it feel good. It gets big. It doesn't gain enough stats. It doesn't scale. It's tough. The only thing that's redeeming about this unit is its essence. Summon plus 10 attack and plus 10 health. Because you can put this into an egg, especially an egg that is endless. And these stats are applied when you play the egg and when the unit that pops out of the egg is hatched, right? So you get double value out of it, and then if you're playing it with endless, it gets even stronger. So the essence is probably the strongest part of this unit, so don't sleep on it for that, at least. But otherwise, we've hit on all these other ones, right? We've talked about the Inspire lines, the eggs, and the Etch. So cool. As far as rare units go, we've talked about all of these as well. The Egg, Glugsider, and Glareminder when we talked about Etch values. So fair enough. We've hit on all those. Then let's jump over to Relics. Yeah. Up front, I want to say that Wurmkin Relics are among the most powerful sets of relics in the game. I talk about the average power of a Divine Horde or just a relic in general for the other clans. I think Wurmkin's average value is significantly higher than others because the relics are crazy. All of them are good in some fashion. So we'll just go in order. Base charge. At the start of battle, add 2 echoes to every floor. This is extremely good for eggs. It's extremely good for extract because it means you can play an extract card immediately, potentially. It's very good in general if you're playing Reap because it means Reap applied on the bottom floor will do damage as they rise without any effort because of the fact that there are echoes on the floor. In general, this is so good because so many things in this clan interact with the number of echoes on a floor, and having 2 on every floor is really strong as it stands. So big surprise. Bog Slime is a lot like Founding Seal. It says when a spell with Consume is played, gain 1 echo. Think about Inspire triggers, right? So imagine I'm playing an infused Consume spell, like Shelter or something. That triggers normally 1 echo, which is 1 Inspire. But with Bog Slime, that now consumes, which also provides an additional echo. It essentially doubles the value of Inspire on that floor. So if you think about this, this is essentially Founding Seal, as long as you build your deck correctly. And with how strong Inspire triggers are, in large part because of the interaction with relics, this is crazy strong. This relic, if you can even reasonably support it and you need the echoes for any reason, is nuts. For eggs, for Inspire triggers, for whatever. If you're playing Etch, you probably have some interaction with these elements, and you just already are consuming spells, so having free echoes out of it is great. Relic is nuts. Carving Karuska says when a card with Extract is played, gain 1 Ember and 1 Echo. Basically, it's a rebate of echoes when you play Extract, and it gives you Ember. These cards already cost 0, essentially, in almost all cases. It makes them energy positive. This card is broken. This relic is out of control. I think it's one of the strongest relics in the game right now for the same reason as before. It gives you free echoes and it gives you free Ember. It solves so many questions for you. And as long as you can afford the initial cost, it basically pays for itself on some of the stronger ones that are cheaper, right? Like Echo Infusion costs 1, right? Okay, it costs 1, you get 1 back. Great job. As long as you had the ability to start it up, it's essentially infinite echoes. Crazy relic. We talked about what Reap is. Decayed Decoy just adds 1 stack of Reap whenever it's applied. Because Reap generally is applied in small numbers, this can be really, really strong. Fracture, the starting card of the clan with the Spine Chief, and the default is plus 2 Reap. So this is a 50% damage increase. And considering how strong Fracture is, this is actually ridiculously good if you have any Reap generation whatsoever. I'm also going to talk about this next to Serrated Mandibles, which says when you add 1 or more echoes to a floor, applies Reap 1 to a random enemy unit twice. This interacts positively with Decayed Decoy and becomes Reap 2 twice. You can just clear waves thanks to the combination of Decayed Decoy and Serrated Mandibles. These two together are out of control. You just play echoes and you kill everything. Really good. Dun Echo essentially is an additional infused card in each draft pack of cards, which means that you're more likely to see the purple on a card that you want. Really strong. Overall, great. Big fan of that relic. Echo Seedling is crazy. The first time you play a consume card in a combat, you get 2 free copies of it. So if you have an intrinsic consume spell you really want to play on turn 1, now you can play it 2 additional times. This relic is crazy because now you can interact with the new copies of the cards, right? I can pull them back with Broken Memories or Wurmkin Etchings or Repeater on Echowright. And then if I have Bog Slime, this is just free extra triggers on turn 1 or whenever I play the first consume spell. This relic is nutty. You have Encased Divinity, which adds a permanent, unremovable echo to the top floor. This is strong, as you might imagine. It means that you always have 1 echo. Really good, honestly. I think it's actually potentially the weakest of these relics, but regardless, it's still great. So, we talked about Hardened Hull. This thing is nuts. I take this thing at the beginning of the game, find an egg, win the game from there pretty much. Or maybe you already have an egg and you take this and it works. It works also positively with Marsh Lord, one of the Echowright paths we'll touch on in a second. So yeah. Mind Horde, it's also kind of one of the weaker ones. It basically gives you 5 space for echoes on a floor instead of 4, so you can build up a larger amount of echoes over time if you want to just kind of stash them. It can be sometimes situationally good. Notice Stone, when you play a consume spell, all cards in your deck gain +1 magic power for the rest of the battle. This adds up fast. It's like Forgotten Name from Stygian, just better. There's no limit. Every time you consume, this number goes up. And, 10 magic power adds up real quick. It does a lot of damage. You turn a Plink from a 2 damage spell into a 22 damage spell. That's pretty excellent, right? And you can just keep going, right, if you're returning consume spells and playing them again. So this number can get something really high by the end of a combat. And yeah, this is a really good relic as long as you're playing into Etch whatsoever. And we already touched on Serrated Mandibles. I have no bad relics in here. The worst relics in here are like Mind Horde and Encased Divinity, and even those are good in situations. So, really good hits. I value relic hits highly in this clan. So, I do want to jump over to the champions, of course. I think they're both excellent. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but suffice it to say that Spine Chief is the Echo Generation, Echo Interaction champion path. You have an Inspire line, which is what we talked about earlier. It applies Reap to the entire floor. This thing solos runs, potentially, as long as you can get enough purple density in every turn that you play. It can go out of control and just kill entire waves, and all you have to do is answer Relentless somehow. And sometimes, if you generate enough Reap, you kill the boss with Relentless before Relentless even happens. So, fair enough. Corruptor, instead of gaining Inspire triggers from echoes being added, it now just adds a huge amount of damage to units on the floor per echo on the floor. You can imagine the situations where this is useful. Quick sweep, things like that. Very strong. You just overload this with units on the floor, 1 spacers pretty much. You max out things on this floor. It can be bog flies from bog worm, bog eggs, whatever. You just get like 6 units behind it, all with multi-strike or something, and you're just going to blow up the universe. This is a very powerful line. Infector, surprisingly, it generates echoes on attack and gets multi-strike. You'd think multi-strike would be good. This is actually the weakest path of all three of them, and yet it's still game winning because it generates 3 echoes on hit. And you imagine that with any of the Inspire lines we talked about earlier, and it can actually get really out of control. Chief is a great champion. Both of these champions, in my opinion, are A tier across the board, so I love playing with them. Moving on to Echowright, this is the Etch path. The Etch champion interacts with consume spells. I'm going to talk about Repeater first because Repeater just brings back consume spells. And if you have a start that can support Repeater, this is usually pretty busted. You can find ways of bringing back ridiculously powerful consume spells. Usually I will curate my consume pile, make sure I'm only playing a certain number of them so that when they come back, I'm always getting the good ones, right? Very good. This mixes well with the other two paths, right? Shellsmith is just you play a consume spell, you etch the floor, it generates a lot of armor to the whole floor. This is survivability answered for the entire run, basically. And this dude, when you etch enough, becomes a formidable tank for whatever your backline is. And he also slaps. He does 60 damage on his own at the end there. So this guy's great. And he's also only 2 space, so he's not even that bad to play into. Normally I like doing Shellsmith 2, Repeater 1, just bring back a consume spell and get a free consume every turn, which ultimately usually adds up to more than the armor 14 would from the Shellsmith 3, but it all depends on kind of what your deck looks like. Martial Lord is a weird path. I don't love this because it changes roles throughout the run by summoning a different egg when you play it. And then the eggs have different space requirements. The eggs do different things. You want different units in your run for it. Sometimes I leave this on eggs of Martial Lord 1 just to have 2 bodies here, right? Because that spawns a Bog Chrysalis, which hatches into 2 flies. Sometimes I go into 2 just because I want the Kinhost Vessel with multiple hits, a single unit there. And sometimes I go for all the way because I want the big trampled dude that overflows my floor. So it depends. This is a good path. I think it is a comfortable path to play. It has winning lines, but it's weird, and I don't think it's particularly well designed from a design perspective. But that's neither here nor there. It is strong, and I suppose it's all that really matters for you. So, yeah, I mean, that is Wurmkin. Despite the fact that I had only so much to say here, and this wasn't even one of the strongest clans, still ran long. We're at 37 minutes and a half, so I won't delay too much longer. I don't want this to get to 40 minutes. I think the clan is extremely solid, but also extremely complex. It's not a good clan to start the game with. Work on the other ones first, master those clans, then move into this one. It's very complex and tricky to play, by a lot, actually. You will likely get slaughtered, and you will incorrectly evaluate your deck's strength regularly while learning this clan. Don't get frustrated. That's the way I'll put it. Give them a chance, watch some YouTube videos, and just trust. The clan is good. And yeah, that's as much as I need to say. So hey, thanks a lot for watching this and sticking through the extra few minutes here. I really appreciate your time. As always, you can give the video a like or a dislike if you want. You can subscribe to the channel if you want to see more, and stay tuned for what's next. Lastly, there is the additional video if you want the more in-depth version of this that drills really far down. That'll be in the description below. So hey, thanks a lot. Take care, folks.